I was recently, traveling to, Badami and, a whole lot of North Karnataka watching company theater. I had been told that company theater was sort of degraded, dead, gone from its erstwhile sort of avatar. And I go there and it's a jatre of 2 lakh people who are watching shows of several plays, company natkas, which about 2 lakh people watching 4 shows a day, all of which were houseful. So it's sort of very interesting the way I think theater works out in Karnataka, as opposed to how it works out in Bangalore. So it's sort of I see the differences in which this entire stage functions. So traditional structures are very much alive. They've morphed and they've changed. They've taken on different sort of veneers, outwardly, but they continue to remain, and really be the sort of the continue to remain like sort of the opiate of the masses, sort of thing. It still does that. But in Bangalore, definitely there's being an urban center, being sort of also very cosmopolitan and a metro and all of that. There is definitely different type of theater, different sort of emphasis on experimentation, on an audience for this kind of theater. Yes. But as Karnataka as a whole, traditional performance like company theater or a Yakshagana, all of those, traditional theaters, or even traditional plays sort of really reign very strong. Even now, Mukhyamantri Chandru, a show in Rangashankara, on its 650th show, is a house full with a standing ovation, so it really navigates this sort of, it's very strong past. Definitely, I think slowly and surely. I think one of the things that women have to do in Kannada and in every other sort of theater is sort of actually create work, actually make work, discover a new language in a sense to be able to push back the structure, sort of reclaim their own way of communicating or making theater or playwriting or playmaking, and what does that mean for them? Because so far we have, and especially in Karnataka, so much literature has influenced the theater, and all of the Gyanpith Award winners say even one playwright like Girish Karnad has really changed the landscape for Karnataka theater makers who are making plays in Kannada. But if we have to break away and make our own experimental work, it starts from scratch. It starts from saying, what is my theater? What is my language? And sort of finding your language within your language. So I think that's been that's really where it's at now. And I see so many other Kannada theater makers and women directors, queer directors doing this, sort of actually finding what is my language, what is my story within this story, sort of thing, and that's what's very interesting. Oh, yes, definitely. Like, for example, Rumi Harish, who made a Freedom Begum here in Bangalore, sort of really reclaiming Bangalore's cosmopolitan, queer-friendly sort of status that the city has, this easygoing, fun place to be. And Freedom Begum was such a landmark in that sense. And it was only a queer theater maker who could think of that, to bring such a language into a production. So many makers who are doing interesting work, Daya Sakrepatna, a lot of these people and experimenting in Kannada, experimenting with the language itself, creating new body of work within Kannada. And I think that's hugely helpful. We're constantly reaching out to each other, not necessarily as actors or direct collaborators, but always the sense of solidarity that exists between. I'm always hanging out at Rumi's house or him at mine, or talking to a Daya or a Matangi to say, what are you doing? How are you thinking? Yeah, absolutely. Or even this Talamadile here that I'm doing with Kriti, who was the translator of Akshayambara. Work with her is this is completely different from my sort of line of work, but this is a large line of how people are rethinking the structure. That itself is a huge network of solidarity, and I think that's very much thriving. Well, theater in childhood, sort of being started when my father was in the forest service. He was in the forest department, so we used to, in the early part of me growing up, we were constantly moving places. So every 2 years, you'd find yourself in a new school, new language, new sort of setup, and that's pretty much when I would really head down to the drama department, because it sort of felt like a welcome space. It didn't matter what language you spoke, where you were from. Somehow in that room, everyone could find a language together. So theater sort of was like that for me. It was a safe place to go to in school. And I think it sort of continued much later. It's funny, like, I think about, how I have chosen theater, or theater has chosen me in a sort of a career, I think, of 20-25 years. And it's all in retrospect. I look back and I say, oh my God, okay, so I've done theater throughout. So it's almost, I look back on it in hindsight. I was telling someone recently that I make a play as a last resort. It sort of feels like I know nothing else. When something really moves you and you have an experience, I make a play. So that's sort of been how playmaking has been part of my journey. Doing theater, it being something that I did in school, etc., was okay. But when it comes to actually saying I am doing this is a profession, you will come and my parents will come and watch me on stage, it's still it's 2022. I mean, what, even 10 years ago, I mean, now my parents have made their peace with it, and I think they've pretty much given up on me, but but about 10 years ago, they were shocked. They were like, my God, you want to do this? Theater is still not the respectable thing for a woman to do, Yeah. And especially like an upper caste woman, it's not respectable, being the cynosure of so many public eye, and I feel like I'm listening to dialogues from like an archaic text, but you realize that all of this is very much present. Do you have to do this? Can't you do something more respectable? So theater is still very much tied up with respectability for women, and I see that's probably one of the reasons why I actually don't see so many theater makers who are women. Right. Yeah. I see. I almost see that as two different phases in my journey. There was a point when, just being on stage was sort of this liberating, not being you, being a character, getting into another story. And then after a while, you start to say, whose story? Whose skin am I getting into? And whose lines am I reading? Whose lines are these? Whose language is this? Whose story is this really? And I think that's where what I think you're referring to, to the idea of identity, even within the skin that you inhabit. Who is that person, and who is this person speaking for? And I think that started to become important, much later, when I think my perceptions of gender, feminism, my own discomfort with the way that theater is sort of practiced and done, the sheer lack of agency for even the women characters whose skin I would speak in, so I think in the beginning it's great, you don't question it, it's this beautiful sort of experience, and then you start to wonder, why is this so deeply uncomfortable, and I think when that question starts is when really your journey as a maker starts, when you start to think about your identity, even within the skin of a character who's on stage, to say, who is this woman I'm playing? And how is she related to my life? And is this my story? I don't know, both conscious and organic, I guess, because what really happened um, was doing theater was fun, and it was this sort of thing that we would do. A group of people get together and make something, and a lot of my previous plays were written material which I would get from playwrights who were in New York, American playwrights. A lot of the gender politics in it were pretty much sorted. Like say a Melissa James Gibson, contemporary playwrights, who are making new work, right? And very sort of a sitcomish, urban, sort of very, uh, um, well, easy work in a sense, fun, So a whole lot of people used to come and watch it. And this was also a generation before we had, even sitcoms or Friends or, or a Netflix and stuff like that. And this was a sort of a new phase in English theater at that time, like even like an Arundhati Raja or Jagriti or a BLT, Avam, whole lot of theater people were making these sort of work, and it was that time, when we would do this. Of course, there were also other streams of theater, but this was something that I found was fun and entertaining. And then it sort of turned to, and I was a director at the time. I used to direct. I would not act in my own work, and there were not many women directors. I was one of very very few women directors. And later, when I wanted to sort of act and sort of explore this field more, is when this sort of hits you. You sort of realize that, my God, I have like very limited options. And then in my own work, there was this sort of a creative crisis, in a sense, to say, all of my work looks the same. I have really nothing new to say beyond, oh, this is all fun. How great it is for a bunch of people to get together and put up a play. What else am I saying? What is my work? This sort of, I think, wondering of some sort of existential crisis. I stopped making work for a couple of years, and that's when I decided to go to Udupi and watch some Yakshagana, etc., and see what is theater in Kannada, in my language. What is this whole theater scene that I haven't seen at all? And it sort of really started with a creative crisis and a journey. And that really completely, and that journey, I think, really completely changed a whole lot of the next, I don't know, maybe 10 years of how I'm making work. Yeah, so when I went to I came to Udupi and I wanted to watch Yakshagana because I studied in Manipal, for 10 years, and it was and Yakshagana was always something that used to happen around here, but never really actually watched it. So I came to Udupi, I came to South Canada, and I decided sort of to travel, watch some performances, and what I watched was just absolutely stunning. There was this form that was made by the villagers for the villagers. It was performed by the farmers for the farmers, sort of set up, where the whole village was cued into this performance. They were, of course, talking stories of the Dwapara and the Treta Yuga and the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, but they were hugely contemporary. No, the whole village comes to watch a show every night for 4 months, not because they are talking about stories of Ramayana. They're here because it's so contemporary. They're talking about today, and that was what was so stunning. For me, I was fascinated, and it felt like, my God, this is what I was searching for, and then I decided that, okay, this, I'm going to learn this form. I'm going to be here. I'm going to be in Udupi, because you don't just learn a form, you learn a culture, so that's what I really wanted, I think. I decided to come to Udupi, packed up my bags and arrived at, Yakshagana Kendra. And the one problem being that, women don't perform Yakshagana. But I had a really sort of liberated, open-minded, guru who said, just come, stay here. And so I stayed in Yakshagana Kendra in Udupi for 2 years. So it's a school that trains Yakshagana, children, to become Yakshagana performers. So everyone from all sorts of, little boys from the age of like 8 to all the way to 40, 45 live there, so that was a place that I was training and living and performing for about 2 years till Akshayambara happened, so all of those collisions, being a female body in a male space, a space that is in which you have to constantly be in translation, whether it's in dance, whether it's in the way you wear your ornaments, how it fits you, how your voice, your culture works within the performance, what is physically demanded of you, the travel, just the idea of having body parts which the form has not accounted for, all of these sort of collisions within this warm welcome of the space of Yakshagana was really the churning pot for creating Akshayambara. Yeah, so for me, it sort of was, the play came out of all of those questions that I was asking. For me, Yakshagana felt like such an open form. Here you could argue the epics. You could stand in Krishna Mata, in the most traditional space of Krishna worship, and in a Yakshagana performance, call him a drunkard. And everyone will laugh and know exactly what you're talking about. So all of this openness, all of this seeming welcome that the form had, and it welcomed me too. But on stage, from the past 800 years, men play all roles, including those of women. So for me, the question really was, on stage, if you're a bird, if you're a man, you say you're a woman, you're a woman. But if I'm a woman and I say I'm a man, it's not allowed. Why? Why is it only in this question that there seems to be a problem? So the most interesting way that I could represent it is to sort of use the Yakshagana space itself, to use these binaries and sort of pitch them against each other. So Draupadi and Dushasana, or Draupadi and Duryodhana, they become a great sort of foils against each other, just the way that you have man, woman. So man, woman in its most sort of belligerent, binary is in Draupadi and Dushasana, in the sort of the collision that they have as man and woman with each other, leading to the Draupadi Vastrapaharana, which is sort of the disrobing of Draupadi in a public court. And my question was, what happens within the Yakshagana tradition if a man plays Draupadi and a woman plays Dushasana? What happens? Then what happens to this whole epic setup? What happens to morality? It was such an exciting question. And here I was, actually watching Draupadi Vastraparana and Akshayambara, all of these prasangas on a daily basis.
Right.
And suddenly to think of it in a gender perspective was such a sort of a stunning way to bring all of those binaries and questions that I was questioning myself, So to put myself there as Dushasana, the one playing the male warrior, entering the form, asking for space, and a veteran Srivesha artist playing the woman, So off stage, their power dynamics are completely different from how it plays on stage, where they are actually male and female are reversed, So I had to work with Prasad Cherkari. I had to work with my gurus, who did the music. My other guru did the choreography for the piece. So it was completely in collusion with the tradition. So in a sense that it was asking questions of tradition with the traditional theater makers, with the makers of that form. And I felt like that was where the openness of Yakshagana is, because they were so willing ask these questions. They said, "Oh, how the la maraya?" Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, what happens now? Sort of thing. So I think there really was where I discovered Yakshagana on my own terms. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there was a whole bunch of privilege checks for me as a sort of an urban woman, like you said, an upper caste urban woman, English speaking woman entering a sort of a traditional space, right? The kind of welcome that is laid out for me is very different from how it might be for someone who is not me, and all of these were sort of part of the play. It was sort of, I think. It was a very unself-conscious addition, the if when I'm doing a privilege check on gender, there was also a privilege check on my position as someone entering the firm. So it's sort of always a really very unself-conscious entry into the writing process itself, because I was really writing from having been there and having experienced this. When in an all-night performance, when we used to sit and watch, with some of the other village girls, I would sit and we would be watching Shurpanaka, Manabanga, where her nose is cut and she's mutilated. And I would say, why is the song for this in Hasya? Like they sing it in Hasya Rasa. Why isn't it in Shoka? Why isn't it in anger? It's sort of almost humiliating that, she's mutilated, and it is funny. And then they would look at me and say, "Akkad hage." Like they would say, "It's like that." That's the Yakshagana sort of thing. But I think this also being this outsider insider, that position that I was in was very vital to be able to ask these questions, to sort of be the critic, who knows the culture but really doesn't know it, and is actually coming from some other space. So that also did give me agency to ask questions that otherwise someone who's so entrenched within the culture could not have asked. So there was also that aspect that the play deals with. And absolutely, in terms of, I think, intersectionality, the play did a lot of that. There's a very moving section in the play where we discover Prasad's backstory. The character who plays Draupadi, what happened, and how sort of these cycles of violence and these sort of very violent divisions and binaries and gender roles are sort of perpetuated sort of ancestrally. They come to you. They are experiences in the way that society makes you into a man, and that process is usually extremely violent. And I think we looked at masculinity with that lens, and even when I turn into a man, we look at the violence that is done on Prasad, to turn into that man. He's been made into a particular kind of man through a history which you see on stage, and I have to repeat that violence to be able to reach a moment of catharsis. Like me as Dushasana, I have to take that mantle on where I say, I'm going to strip you, to that point where finally you have catharsis. And I think it's such a sort of a commentary on the violence of how masculinities are constructed. And I think we reject that, and at the end of the play we reject this me and him together, sort of find a place where this needn't be the way we look at gender. We can have an alternate space in which we can meet. And I think that's really where the play kind of comes one full circle by setting up this extremely hard, severe binary and then just melting it, and then just saying it doesn't exist, doing away with it and examining it in such detail and then dismantling it. I think that's where the play really draws its power. Oh my God, yes, Nava was a completely different sort of experience from from being in a hyper-masculine sort of Yakshagana setup where, 800 years of history of only men and surrounded constantly by men to be in a place where, the women would ask me, why don't you wear lipstick? Don't you have any self-respect? To sort of be in that lovely, sort of extremely different space with 9 transgender women. And also 9 transgender women, very, very different from a Yakshagana setup, because here you were dealing with high levels of skill and ability, and skill and ability, of course, is privilege, at the end of it. And here I am with 9 transgender women who have never been on stage before, and I'm thinking, my God, what are we going to do together, except the commonality that we have, which is that of language, and which is that of the fact that I knew them as friends, because Aravani Art Project is is run by Purnima, who's a dear, dear friend of mine. So I've always known them as my friends, colleagues, and I've hung out with them in bars or gone here and there, with them. But now here we are in a theater space together, and they have never performed. And I'm coming from an extremely different sort of play that I've done before, 2 years of immersion in something very different to this. So yeah, Nava was quite was a deep dive. And I think we're still continuing to engage. I think I'm not. It's constantly evolving piece. I think the women evolve their craft and what they want to say, and we're sort of still evolving that together. We have a show, Vikram, coming up in we're in G5 in Bombay soon in the end of March. We have a bunch of shows there, and we're putting the play back together after a break in the pandemic, and how many things have happened, like the actors constantly change. One of the actors, for instance, had an accident, she lost her leg, so she's coming back to the floor now, changed. She's an actor now who has to work with a disability, and I don't know how her story is going to change in that process. So it's a play that very, very viscerally and very sort of without pause, deals with how lives constantly change, and how the theater can take it. How the structure that I create for this play can take that change. Sometimes an actor doesn't show up for a show. She cannot be there, and what happens to the show? Do we include her? Do we go on without her? In what ways do we include her? So usually what I do is have her piece in silence, so that we know that she couldn't come, and there's a story here that could not be told. So the structure of theater itself, in the way that we think of a show, the idea of consistency, the idea of the same actor showing up, the idea that the show must go on, all of these sort of large ideas are broken down in the process of Nava. So I think it's sort of very, very different from Akshayambara, and very, very and just as much of a deep dive for me. Yeah, that's so interesting. I love that word, reappropriate. That's exactly, I think that's where Malashri's challenge was for me, because and also I think I love the way that when you think about a feminist reappropriation, how that also chimes with so much of class and caste. When I reappropriated Malashri, into the Malashri challenge, it was run on Takatak. It's a sort of a takeoff from TikTok, since it was banned in India, right? And Takatak, I realize, has regional content and about 20 million users. And I, as a sort of an urban woman, who doesn't use, this platform, I wasn't speaking to 20 million people. My security guard, so many of the trans women, so many people of a particular class use it. And I used to think that internet was one of the mediums which brought us together. But I realized in the pandemic, especially during the process of making Malashri Challenge, that even the internet is a space in which all of these social sort of divisions exist. And one of the wonderful things about reclaiming a Kannada mainstream, commercial, delicious sort of icon like Malashri is that she can bring feminist debate into spaces like Takatak, because she already did it in the Kannada mainstream space. She already did it. But in a way that when I reclaim her, we can only reclaim her back into a popular, secular, sort of democratic platform like Takatak. And what was really heartening is the response that it got. It had about 1.7 lakh views, and it had about like 15,000 likes, and that's the sort of experiment that a full house in Rangashankara is 300 people, and here you're talking about 1 lakh views. So it was very, very heartening to sort of experiment with this in this sort of format. Yeah. Yes. I think it's a sort of a community shaper. Unfortunately, I think caste has been such a strong shaper of agency and talent, and the very idea of community is sort of shattered by and brought together in some sort of very weird ways by caste. I think it's absolutely unignorable, even in the sort of the feminist intersectional work that I do. I'm constantly confronted by it in every kind of research, every sort of activity that you do. Caste is so evident. Like, for instance, in Akshayambara, I play myself, but just and even and what is interesting is you don't even have to say it. It's so deeply entrenched. The idea of caste is just the way I'm speaking and the color of my skin as an Indian person. You would know what caste I am. Even in Kannada, there's a particular kind of Mysore Brahmin Kannada that I speak. The dialect itself, you would be able to place me within a caste system. Whereas, in Akshayambara, when Prasad, we don't really talk about his caste, but he speaks in Tulu, for a bit in the play, and you immediately know that is what caste he will be, right? So it's sort of language systems, communities, and sort of people's sort of unconscious understanding of the world and society are shaped by caste, and I think it's unignorable, I think, in our work. For me, living and growing up within an upper caste, Brahmin setup has been extremely oppressive, because it is highly oppressive to its women. But I'm also very aware of the sort of the privileges that it has given me. So it's sort of this constant battle that you have with it. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. In what ways do I carry this story? Because it's interesting, because we started this conversation by, me describing to you about how I felt like, my God, whose stories am I carrying? And which is how this whole journey started. And with the performers or actors that I work with, or communities I work with, I don't want them to be asking the same question. I don't want them to be carrying my stories. I want them to be carrying theirs. And in what ways can I bridge that, or heal those gaps, or be present in the middle? Those are definitely concerns, and it's definitely something that I constantly think about. For instance, in this new arts research that I'm doing with the company Theatre Women, so much of this is caste related, right? I mean, so much of it is a particular caste of women who did frontline comedy roles, and a certain caste of women who didn't do this, and caste has defined sexuality and respectability, two extremely important things for women performers. So it's very present, definitely, and it's something that I don't know how to solve, but it's something that I'm very, very aware of, and I'm not sure, and I have to, and I'm aware that I have to constantly work with this and negotiate it, and sometimes it's also a barrier to my understanding. There is a certain worldview that I come with, which is constantly challenged, and I'm not sure if I fully get it. Even during interviews, I sit there and I think, my God, I probably don't understand this place from where these women are speaking from at all. And I think sometimes just that awareness is enough.